So here's what we got. We got Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. So first of all, the gap between Chris and Adam on Ridley is huge. Chris has him all the way up at wide receiver 24. Adam's got him down at wide receiver 39. But the twist is here, this is also going to be about DeAndre Hopkins because Adam has Hopkins ranked ahead of Calvin Ridley. So Chris is going to battle out as to why that should not be the case on his side. So Chris, take it up to Calvin Ridley, and then why is he ranked ahead of DeAndre Hopkins?
Well, I'll talk about the Calvin Ridley part. The DeAndre Hopkins and him, it's going to be a little harder for me to kind of argue strongly. But the Calvin Ridley thing is, look, Adam, I know you hate Calvin Ridley, and it's obvious you've hated him since last year, and you score and love her in some kind of way. But you all admit Jacksonville utilized him in a proper way, didn't have a clue what they were doing. But he still finished receiver 17 last year. He still had 8 touchdowns, still had over 1,100 yards. So this guy who's such a bum, his first year back from being out of football for almost a couple of years, was able to produce at receiver 17, goes to a team that paid him $50 million guaranteed, is going to feature him as receiver 1 on that team. They keep talking about how they're going to give him the Jamar Chase role. They're going to move him around. They're going to utilize him in different ways to kind of get him the guys that featured guys in their passing attack. So I look at Calvin Ridley as at 24. I think he's definitely receiver 2 as a guy who's going to have a lot of volume in his passing attack. And I a little bit about the coaching staff in general. I didn't get to comment much about the running backs and Tony Pollard, who, guys, look, he was hurt going in, the year before last year. I keep hearing about the volume thing. I don't think it was a volume thing. I was hurt last year. Let's see what Tony Pollard is when he's healthy the whole season this year. But the offensive changing of guard that we've seen, and this has been Anthony highlighted earlier, bringing Brian Callahan Sr. in for his offensive line is going to be huge. Now, add the fact that you actually have another talented lineman on this team. They brought in a good center in Kissenberry. So you have 3 linemen that actually could potentially decent versus what they've had in Tennessee for the last 3 or 4 years. It's been horrendous. And then you have a guy who was around quarterbacks with Matthew Stafford, who had his best year with him in Detroit. He was with Peyton Manning when he had his 4 of his best years in Denver. He was with Derek Carr when he had his best year in the Raiders. So now he goes to Will Levis. Is Will Levis the same level as all those guys? No, but we all agree Will Levis has been in position to be, this is your team, and you're going to throw the ball to everybody you want to. So a guy who got paid a lot with a guy who we know that Will Levis loves. Now, this is where I have a hard time, Adam, DeAndre Hopkins over or under Calvin Ridley, Dan. That's harder for me because we saw last year Will Levis is definitely willing to air it out. And he will throw that ball to DeAndre Hopkins come hell or high water. I think DeAndre Hopkins will be that red zone target guy who they're going to look for, a la the T. Higgins role, in a sense. So I do think DeAndre Hopkins still has a lot of upside. It's going to depend on where Calvin Ridley kind of connects with him, because I think Levis does prefer Hopkins right now. I mean, you saw that last year. That was the guy he was looking for consistently, but he didn't have a whole lot of choices. I do think the Hopkins can still be a guy that I have still in the top 30, because I think the volume is going to be there for both these guys. And we've seen this, like I highlighted all those quarterbacks in those different offenses. All the second receiver, as Chase was talking about the different stats, all the second receivers in the offenses all had over 1,000 yards as well, and had over 6 or 7 touchdowns on average. So putting those things together, I think we can see both these guys be really successful. But I think Calvin Ridley to me is a guy that could not be receiver 39. Adam.
Yeah, I'm glad that I got to, shed the AFC South bias with the last one, where I was the higher end on a non-Colts player. So let me just get that out of the way. And second of all, I want to like Calvin Ridley. This has nothing to do with Calvin Ridley, the individual player. I admit going into last season, I wasn't in on him, but that was like, all right, I'm not taking the gamble on someone who missed the year. And then I admit during the season, I was like, I'm glad I didn't do that. He sucks, whatever. Come out of the season. And then I dug into it a little bit more. And Chris, exactly as you said, he was misused. That was not a Calvin Ridley problem. That was a Doug Peterson problem. 100%. So it's like, all right, cool. We get into the offseason. You're on the move. Where do you go? And that's where this falters to me. So I just see this offense shaping out in such a way that, look, part of it was the misuse. Part of it was the misuse. Part of it was the misuse. At the end of the day, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins were both bottom 10 in separation. They were not getting away from corners. To me, who is Will Levis going to prioritize? Is the guy that he already has experience with, the guy that he's had an offseason with already. Cool, that's DeAndre Hopkins. So of the non-separators, I think it's going to be DeAndre Hopkins. It's the alpha. Now, if you disagree with that, then this entire argument falls apart right there. So I'm willing to throw that out there.
Adam, do you think Kyle Ridley's like a terrible route runner? Because the separation part's where you're bothering me. I think that's where the scheme thing does matter.
Yeah, I think it does. I think he's going to, regress to the mean in the sense that he makes it to maybe middle of the pack. But where I was going to get to is, do I think he separates more than Tyler Boyd, who I admit was on the downswing last year, but was one of still the top separators in the league? No, I don't think he passes Tyler Boyd. So we've got the guy that's normally open. We've got DeAndre Hopkins, who I'm pushing the ball to down the field. To me, can Will Levis support a third guy? I'm not sure of that. And it especially comes with the piece of, while I agree this offensive line with Callahan coming in and with the talent is on the upswing, we're talking one offseason with one confirmed good offensive lineman and two guys who are very, very talented and I think in the future are going to be very good offensive linemen. Let's call it a spade a spade. Skoronski was average last year. Like, average. Not bad. Average. He was not great last year. Do I think he will be an above average to great offensive lineman in the future? Absolutely. But am I like super sold on the fact that one offseason with a good coach is going to change that? I'm like, again, once we get 2 off seasons, 3 off seasons, sure, like 100%. Same thing with Latham. I loved him as a prospect. I might have been higher than a couple of you, at least when we were doing our pre-draft. Like, he was my offensive tackle 3. He was pretty close to my offensive tackle 2. Like, I really like Latham. So this isn't like me disliking Latham. It's just the fact that he is a rookie left tackle for a quarterback that holds onto the ball for too long, who is going to get really great coaching, but one off season of it. So on the whole, the build of this offense concerns me in the short term. And again, to me, Calvin Ridley, not necessarily that he's going to be the second option rather than the third option rather than the second, but I just think he overlaps a little bit too much with Hopkins, and I think Hopkins is the superior between them, whereas Boyd is off doing like something different, has a completely different role. So to me, Ridley isn't the bet that I'm willing to make.
All right, Anthony, a lot to unpack there. What do you got?
Yeah, it's close, but I think I side with Chris here.
Okay. That's it? No elaboration?
In terms of this wide receiver room, I feel like I went over it earlier. We were talking about Will Levis. I think both of these wide receivers, they're veterans. This is one of the oldest wide receiver rooms in the league. I believe they're all over 29 years old.
Yeah.
They're all going to have their role. I think we know what Boyd is at this point. When it comes to the 2 guys on the outside, the 2 alphas, I can see both of them, in terms of fantasy, having a very close finish. And they're probably going to cannibalize each other. So there's not one I really like more than the other. I'm drafting Calvin Ridley higher, but I do think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be very much in this offense. Like, he's not going anywhere, and he's also worked with Will Levis a little bit longer.
Yeah, agreed. I agree with all that. So we're gonna give Chris the win here, and I'll just throw this out there. That Anthony, what you just laid out is why I am lower than ADP on both Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, because I don't know if they can either one reach their ceilings by eating into each other. And we all know that I'm not a big fan of Will Levis, so I don't think he gets them both the ball as much as they need to outperform it.